Alrighty. Well, as folks are starting to trickle in, and we're already at 2:02, I want to make sure we get started with today's conversation. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have a great lineup of speakers for you to hear from today as we take a look at what's in the governor's proposed budget adjustments and what's on the docket related to affordable housing in this year's legislative session. Before I hand it over to today's presenters, I want to introduce you to the partnership first and cover some quick housekeeping items. So first and foremost, today's session is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel in the next week or so, ideally. If you have any questions, please use the chat box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen to drop your questions in. My team and I are going to do our best to get to as many questions as possible in the hour that we have. So with that, let's dive right in. So at the Partnership for Strong Communities, we shape solutions to housing issues in Connecticut. We envision a future where everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that is affordable to them and an equitable community of their choice. We are here for housing justice, equity, and access. We have been around for 25 years, and if you have been around with us, you've likely noticed that while our look and our website may have changed fairly recently, our mission and our approach have not. We are advocates and policy experts. We engage in smart policy design and strategic civic and political advocacy to expand housing opportunity. We are researchers and resources. We work to produce valuable, timely materials to inform policies, empower communities, and foster a deep understanding of affordable housing challenges and solutions. And we're conveners. We serve as a hub for knowledge and for collaboration. We create spaces for shared insights and collective action. Our mission is carried out through our partnership. We are committed to policies and practices that reduce disparities in housing and outside of and within our organization. We ground our work in facts and data, and we prioritize housing solutions that will be affordable and sustainable in the long term. Our guiding principle is that housing is a human right. So how do we realize this vision? We know that a healthy housing system necessitates a comprehensive approach that intertwines housing affordability, creation, choice, and stability. We'll touch on all of these buckets in today's conversation, but what's really important is that people need to afford their homes while meeting all of their other basic needs. And we need more physical homes, period. We need all different types of homes for people to choose from in all communities across our state. And people should have the right to safe, stable homes and be supported from the experiences of housing instability, eviction, and homelessness. This is how we weave a housing system that prioritizes the needs of our residents and that supports strong families and strong communities. So you've just been welcomed to today's conversation. After I walk you through the agenda, I'm going to hand it over to Bill with Gallo and Robinson, who will introduce himself, and he'll walk through an overview of the proposed budget adjustments, key dates and committees that are important for housing advocates to be aware of. From there, you'll get to hear from the one and only Sean, our policy director at the partnership, as he talks through our legislative priorities for the session. Following Sean, Sarah White will walk us through some information and details regarding advocacy for just cause eviction legislation this year. And we'll round out the hour by talking about general and upcoming opportunities for advocacy. And we'll leave some time, as I mentioned before, to answer any questions that you may have for our speakers today. And with that, I'm actually really excited to pass it over to Bill Welz to get us started for today's conversation.
Hey guys. Are you doing it? Oh, wonderful. Great.
Yeah, just let me know when you want to move along.
Cool. Hi guys, Bill Welz, lobbyist for Gallo Robinson and the lobbyist for Partnership for Strong Communities. I'm actually joined with by my sessional today.
Hi everyone.
Justice Zotto, who is helping us out this session. She's intrigued to learn more about what we do over here at the Partnership for Strong Communities. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about when it's upcoming, it's here. So I know this is a session kickoff, but we are already in it. We started it on February 7th. But just for a quick refresher, let's go through who the leaders are, just so you're all aware. Not a lot of changes from last year. Still executive branch folks that you remember. Same governor, same lieutenant governor. Treasurer, Comptroller, and Attorney General and Secretary of State have all been the same since last year, but there's a update on their names in case you're not aware who they are. We'll go to the next one. And just a breakdown of the current General Assembly, there was a special election that happened, but there was no change. It was in the House. It was down in West Haven due to the vacancy of Dorinda Boer, who became mayor of the city of West Haven now, and the seat remained Democrat. So the House numbers have not changed. It's 98 Democrats to 53 Republicans. The leadership remains the same on both sides of the aisle there. And the state Senate did not have any special elections or anything, but they still hold their 24-12 supermajority, where they have a veto-proof majority in the Senate. And all those leaders are still the same as last year. So we got a short session, and it's 13 weeks. As I said, we started on February 7th. We're going to be out of there on May 8th. This is considered the budget adjustment year. This is the year that they take the budget, the larger budget that was passed last year, and they are making adjustments to it to make sure that they meet their constitutional mandate to balance the budget before they gavel out on May 8th. They're making these decisions based on the current data and tax revenue and expenditures and the federal funds that are out there. And so that is the most important thing that they do in short session is balance the budget. And go to the next one. But there's also still committees that are happening, and things happen a little differently in the short session than they do in the long session. So in the short session, all bills must be raised by a committee in order, or be emergency certification bills by leaders to be considered throughout the session. In the long session, individual legislators can actually put bills in, and that's why you see on like day one, you see like upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 bills filed, because every legislator can put in any bill that they want. The committee would still need to act on them in a long session, but in the short session, you don't get that big front load of bills because it has to be a committee bill to move forward. Now, legislators can put bills forward in a short session, but they have to be related to budget only. So if they are a bill that impacts the budget, they can put it in, but if not, they have to go through their process. Committees do take on new issues in short session, and I like to say it's a great year to test policy out in that 13-week cycle. But they really do use this session to clean up bills from last year. Like, something was a mistake from last year, we got to go back and revisit it and fix it. Or if something didn't run last year that was so close, and maybe it passed one chamber but needs to pass the second chamber. They do stuff like that. But it's not that they are adverse to doing new policy. They do consider new policy, but there's a real big focus on cleanup and on kind of continuing on the stuff that maybe didn't get to the finish line the year before. As you guys may have seen, if you're involved in the process, they're still doing remote testimony in public hearings. It's still an option. It's a great option because if we have folks who have regular day jobs and they're not advocates, they can go on. They can sign up virtually and they can testify. And I highly encourage people to use this tool, because this is a good way for normal people to have an interaction with their legislature. If you got a badge, if you're like me, I hope that you're spending some time in the Capitol in person, because public hearings are still a great place to catch legislators in and out of the hearings. A lot of them are in person this year. Last year it was about half and half. This year I'm seeing a lot more legislators in public hearings. So it's a good time to catch them in person and talk about your bill. Last thing on the short session process, and it's the one that's no fun. The election is always looming in a short session, and it can damper controversial legislation. So, that doesn't mean controversial legislation doesn't get done. As I said, they like to kind of piggyback on stuff they were working on the year before. But, to the extent that they think it's going to be an election deal breaker, they tend to push that stuff off another year. So once again, I said that we're in a biennium cycle. We're in the second year now. And when the short session was originally established, it was envisioned that it was only going to address the biennium budget, but we don't think it's actually much different than a regular session. It's just shorter. And just so you guys know, the budget that they are working on is the budget for fiscal year 2025, which starts July 1st of this year, 2024, which can be confusing, but the state fiscal year for 2025 starts July 1st of 2024. So what's going on with the budget? As of February 1st, for FY 2024, we're looking at $166.7 million surplus. It's still reduced from the original surplus that they were forecasting when they passed the budget, but it's not as high as it was 2 months ago. I think I gave this presentation to a smaller group of you 2 months ago, and that number was a lot higher. It was in the 60 million range. Now we're down to 11. Now we have a reduced forecast by 11.3 million, which isn't too bad because we're still in surplus. So we're not looking at anything that's going to break the state's bank this year. But just to know where these impacts came from, the Medicaid line was $120 million short than they anticipated. There's just more people in the program seeking more care, and they just didn't account for it. So that's what kind of cut down the surplus a little bit. There's 2 large claims against the state that are totaling $25.2 million that will be paid out, but they did not budget for it. And there's and they have not made approximately $45 million in lapses that were built into the budget. And from what we can see, they're not doing that as now. They decided to just operate on a year 2 budget, and they did make cuts to folks, but it doesn't look like they lapsed anybody from the year before, at least so far. They still could in the next couple of months, but right now they have not. The rainy day fund is flush. It statutorily has been at 3.3 billion. That's the max you can put into it. Last year they did increase the number of dollars that could go into the rainy day fund up to 3.9 million. And they are expecting that it's going to hit that 3.9 million by the end of this fiscal year. So, because that's just the roll in of the state surpluses. Since they have done these fiscal guardrails, over $7 billion from volatile revenue transfers have gone down to pay down the unfunded pension liability. So when the rainy day fund hits its max, everything left over in surplus automatically goes down to pay down our long-term deficits in state, which are teachers' retirement and state employee pensions. And so a lot, $7 billion since at least 2018 is a lot of money to go towards those programs. The state still does have a large long-term deficit, but they have taken a big chunk out of it with these payments. When the budget passed last year, the second year of the budget was actually only $1 million under the spending cap, which is pretty tight. And as some of you probably have been reading the budget that the governor put out, he proposed a $26.1 billion budget for FY25, and he's using $55.7 million in unspent ARPA funds, which would pretty much be the end of all the ARPA funds because they're going to be timing out soon anyway. There is a feeling among everybody that these ARPA funds, that things that have been relying on ARPA are going to be hard to replace in the budget itself, and that even if it's not a major conversation this year, it will be a major conversation next year when those funds are fully expired. Some important dates. We already did the governor already did the State of the State address. He launched his budget on February 7th. That happened. Next thing that's happening right now as we speak is the Appropriations Committee is bringing in agencies into the daytime to talk about their budgets and what they propose. And in the nighttime, you got the public coming in. Not nighttime. Sometimes it's in the afternoon. You have the public in to talk about their impact of the state's budget. We have some important deadlines coming up. Finance Committee's deadline is first, April 4th, and the Appropriations Committee deadline is the day after on April 5th. And as I said, the last day of session is May 8th, so it's a real sprint. So the governor's budget came out, and Sean's going to go over the impact on on housing. But basically, as soon as it came out, we read, we evaluate, and we react. And I think we did all those things. And so the next phase that we're in right now is the appropriations public hearings. As I said, agencies by day, public by night. The judicial branch already did theirs on February 13th. And there is some right to counsel funding in there, $2 million that was asked upon that the governor did, and folks are very happy with that. So people already testified on that earlier this week. But the big one coming up for you guys in the housing community that care is the conservation and development hearing, which starts on Friday, February 23rd at 4 o'clock. I hope to see a lot of you guys there, and I hope that you'll weigh in on the good and the bad in the budget. And then there is some housing items in the health subcommittee too, and that is the final subcommittee of the appropriations hearing, and that's going to be on Monday, February 26th. that night is usually a long night. There's a lot of people come to testify in the health one, so that's usually a big ending public hearing. Finance doesn't do as many hearings as a Probst does because they only have to do their revenue doesn't take as long as individual agencies, but they tend to do their public hearings a little after appropriations is wrapped up. They do still have some agencies come in, and they will have the public heard, and they will release those dates, and we will send them out when they're ready. They likely have a hearing separated on the governor's tax and revenue package, and then they do a separate one on legislative proposals. They have not released the dates for the bonding hearings, but as soon as they are, we will send those out. And once again, their deadline is Thursday, April 4th. Committees that partnership cares about, and hopefully you guys do too. The Housing Committee, in the short session, things are really tight. The Housing Committee has a deadline to raise bills on February 22nd, which is next week. They did do 2 rounds of raising bills, and we've been told that they'll probably do one more before their public hearing on Tuesday. And I'm not going to steal too much of Sarah's thunder coming in to talk about Just Cause, but just want to put it out there. If you're going to be supporting the Just Cause bill, it's going to be heard on Tuesday, February 20th at 11 a.m. Sign up details are online. Partnership send out a blast email to get folks to register, and I hope we could get some folks to talk about the importance of that policy. Housing Committee has one of the earliest JF deadlines of all committees. It's March 14th. So they got to get any bills they want to do, they got to get them out of committee by March 14th. The other bill that we tend to do a lot of stuff in is the Planning and Development Committee. Their deadline is tight too because it's a short session. Their deadline to raise bills is the 23rd. They've already done a round of raising bills, and they plan to do one more round next week as well. Their deadline is a little longer than Housing Committee. They get till March 25th. And as I said, public hearing notices on relevant bills are posted in the bulletin. And usually the partnership does a fantastic job of sending out the ones that they think you should care about. So what happens after the committee process real quick? After the bill's been vetted by the committee, it's sent to the Senate or the House chamber for consideration and debate. The leadership of each caucus determines what is their priority. They read the reports when making these decisions. Bills can be referred back to committees or other committees for further consideration. These are called floor referrals. A bill must pass each chamber. If one chamber amends it, it will need to go back to the original chamber it came from. So you can't pass a bill out of the House, it get an amendment in the Senate, and then go into law. It would have to go back to the House for final consideration. And then from there, it goes to the governor's desk, and the governor gets a final decision. He can sign the bill. He could pass it without signature, meaning he doesn't sign it, but it goes into law, or he can veto it. And then sometime in July, the legislature has the ability to do an override session, but overriding a governor's vote takes a lot of votes. It takes 101 votes in the House, which they don't have that in one caucus, but it takes 24 votes in the Senate, which they actually do have in one caucus. And then this next slide is just, I think I've already saw all these things now raised. So the crystal ball was good. These issues were all going to be talked about, and I think they all have been raised at this point. So the legislature is going to be tackling these issues going into session. And then I'll take any questions. I don't even know if we have time questions. I'm not even sure of the format, but if there are questions and we're taking them, I'm happy to answer them. If not, thank you guys for having me, and I look forward to another productive session with the partnership.
All right, and I will pass it to Sean to dive into some of the partnership's priorities.
Thanks, Danielle. We are saving time at the end of the presentations for questions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I'll talk fast. There's a lot of ground to cover, as always, and Bill did a really awesome job of explaining the context of the session. For housing, the headline for the governor's budget proposed adjustments to the budget, there are no significant new resources for housing this year, for this coming fiscal year. The governor's proposal maintains the bonding resources of about $430 million for the coming fiscal year that were authorized in last year's biennial budget. The governor started his address on opening day of the session to join both chambers by talking about housing. So the administration recognizes how important housing is, but unfortunately, when you look at the rest of the governor's budget, there really aren't a lot of new activities or resources available. So we see in Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services an increase of 2.9 million for wraparound services. That includes 1.3 million for chronic homelessness and additional supportive housing. That wraparound service to match with an existing 140 federal housing vouchers designed to create additional supportive housing. And that line also includes 1.2 million for 12 positions at state operator homeless for state operator homeless outreach. And in Department of Housing itself, there's a small adjustment, increase of $905,000 for cost of living adjustments to providers. And but of note is one of the lines in the Department of Housing budget that we pay close attention to is there's one that called the Housing and Homeless Services line. And the governor does not propose any changes to that line, but one thing's important to note is in this existing previous fiscal year, it ran significantly over budget, and it's estimated to run over budget in this fiscal year that's closing out in July. And we'll get into rental assistance program vouchers shortly, but so without any additional resources in that line item, which the governor is not proposing, we anticipate there's going to be a deficit. And then finally, the American Rescue Plan, ARPA federal dollars are still in circulation in the state, and there's a balance that the state's allocating, and the governor's proposing to allocate $2 million for to the Right to Counsel program, or Right to Counsel and eviction proceedings, and $1.5 million for an online housing voucher application system. Next. So I'm going to quickly talk through the partnerships legislative priorities, which we are thinking of in these four buckets. I think we're supposed to pillars. I forgot what we're calling them. Housing affordability, housing creation, housing choice, and housing stability. We recognize that there's a lot. Housing policy is diverse. There's a lot of different needs in housing, but we feel like these four areas really capture all the things the partnership wants to focus on. So we'll get started with housing affordability. Next. On our legislative priorities, we are asking for an additional investment of $60 million in the state's rental housing voucher program called the Rental Assistance Program. And when you think back, the previous slides, I was talking about deficit in this line, rents have gone up by about 20% in the last 3 years. And so the increased cost to maintain the rental assistance program, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's costing more to house the same number of folks with a rental assistance program certificate. And what we estimate is that we expect there to be a deficit in 2025's budget of about $8 million. And that would fill that hole and allow the program to continue to maintain the number of families that are currently served by RAP. So otherwise, what happens is as a certificate becomes available, it may not go back into circulation because overall the program's costs have gone up because of rent. So we think that's a very critical request to get into the appropriations committee. And I don't think Bill mentioned that part of. There's an appropriations committee hearing on a week from today, and we'll be testifying on this item, and we'll be sending out an alert shortly with details on how to sign up. And we think it's really important, and hope many of you will be able to submit testimony either in writing or actually speak virtually or in person. You can see, I'll be at the Capitol that night if you're looking to hang out on Friday night. So I said we're investing 16, we're asking for an investment of 16. We know there's such a critical need for affordable homes in the state. There's about 119,000 families in Connecticut, renters that spend more than half of their income on housing costs. They're almost entirely families with very low incomes. So we're asking the state to start to chip away at that. If they can increase the investment in that line by another 8 million, so 16 million in total, that can provide another 650 families with a rental voucher. And finally, we're asking the legislature to expand the reporting requirements on RAP. As we've learned more about the program, we're discovering it's hard to learn more about the program. And we think the best way to figure out how to make this the most effective program that for families that need the services, need the vouchers, is to learn more about the program and ask the Department of Housing to include some increased amount of reporting, including when the last opening of the wait list, number of applications submitted, number of households added to the wait list, those sort of fundamental questions about the program, really basic facts that are very difficult to get right now. Next slide. So additional housing items that we're watching that fall into this housing affordability bucket. There's others beyond this because as Bill said, there's this maybe smaller wave than in the long session, but it still feels like a wave. This Tuesday there's a hearing at the Housing Committee SB 146 will be on the agenda. That bill includes ensuring vouchers are market responsive. That's something our friends at Open Communities Alliance and Growing Together Connecticut Coalition are supporting. And also on the agenda, HB 5154, which is a proposal to add an additional $10 million for the Security Deposit Guarantee Program. And that program is just what it says, and paired with vouchers, and because obviously with demands around rents so high, landlords looking to have for them the security of a security deposit. This is a really important program for low-income renters. Next, so we'll move on to housing creation. So I mentioned the governor's proposed budget maintains the $430 million that were passed for bonding for housing in the last budget. So we want to ensure that remains the case. And I don't have any indication that it won't, but it's something that the partnership always watches. We know we can't solve the housing crisis in the state without a variety of approaches. We think vouchers for families are critical, but just as important is continuing to have the state fund the development of affordable homes for our most needy families, our lowest income families, or families that otherwise are not able to afford a home. And so I'll move on right now. So several other items, I think, excuse me, Danielle, tell me if you need me to move quicker. I apologize. I know we only have an hour, but so these are a few other items that we've already seen and we expect to see around housing creation. The first is this housing growth fund that Elm City Communities, it's the Housing Authority of New Haven, is advocating for as part of the Growing Together Connecticut Coalition. It's a program to really reward the creation of more homes and communities. Open Communities Alliance is also, and we are supporting a plan to make investments in sewer infrastructure that support affordability, often for good and true and maybe not so true reasons. Lack of sewer infrastructure can prevent affordable housing from being approved at the local level. And there's no question the state needs expanded investments in sewer infrastructure. We want to make sure there's affordability associated with that. I think this is a great bill. HB 5120 and HB 5122 are interesting bills. You'll see, like Bill Welz mentioned, Representative Doucette, this is not a committee bill because it has to do with money. And Representative Doucette, who's a member of the Finance Committee, has these two bills, which I'm interested in learning more about. One is to authorize $50 million in bonding for a program for grants to develop supportive housing. And the other is $20 million for an existing program at the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority that I'm a big believer in. And I hope we could see more, see this expansion that's really focusing lending on improving existing small multifamily rental homes. So when we're talking about small, we're talking about the 2, 3, 4 family houses that we all know are dotted across the state, and many can use those resources for rehab. Next. Finally, housing choice. So we are looking, some of you may recall a couple of sessions ago, the legislature and governor passed a law that requires land use commissioners, planning, zoning commissioners to get training. This I feel like is a companion piece to that, and the requirement that towns all have an affordable housing plan. When we look at, we know towns have affordable housing plans, but we don't necessarily know how they're performing to them, right? They say they want to do something. Are they doing it, right? And right now, the state, as with the RAP reporting, we don't really necessarily know a lot about what's going on. And we want the state and the public to understand what's really happening at the local level and the local planning and zoning commission meetings. So we're asking very simply for municipalities to report that to the state on a quarterly basis. How many applications have you gotten? How many have you approved? How many have you denied? How many homes is that in the state? This is where, you know, to use the cliche, the rubber meets the road. All the plans in the world won't matter unless a project is approved at the local level. So if we're not counting, we have no idea whether or not we're working towards creating a state that has adequate housing. So other things we're watching, Work, Live, Ride, our friends at Desegregate Connecticut are advocating for. And what Work, Live, Ride really focuses on is incentivizing additional homes in places that make sense for families, for the economy, and for the environment around mass transit. And if you want to learn more about that bill, check out Desegregate Connecticut's website. They had also had an press event yesterday and morning. You may have seen that in media. Next. Oh, I said finally before I was wrong. Got one more, housing stability. I was getting ahead of myself. All right, so we're going to get to Sarah White from Connecticut Fair Housing Center in a minute, but quickly I'll say around the Just Cause Eviction Protection Bill, but I won't say any more about that because, as Bill said, not to steal her thunder. So we'll go on to the next. So a few of the other things. There's a lot. You know what housing stability is about. Really is. You know, most lower income families that are struggling with housing are not beneficiaries of any of the programs we're talking about, whether they're subsidized home, a public housing authority home, vouchers. They're living in private market housing that's the best they can afford, right? And often they can't afford it, but that's what's out in the market. So we know in this scarcity environment where there's just not enough quality housing that the poorest families are in these homes, right? And so the state really needs to focus on ensuring housing stability and renters protections for these families. So we're supporting HB 5091. There's also a Senate bill that's almost identical that I don't have the number, but this is being advocated for by the Connecticut Coalition on Homelessness to invest $20 million to stabilize and strengthen the state's homeless services system. We're also seeing this great bill, HB 5174, which would allow places, religious organizations that own property to be able to have temporary shelter for folks on that property, up to 8 temporary shelter units. This is something we haven't seen here in Connecticut. There's examples of it in other parts of the country, and I'm interested to see that move forward. Our friends at Connecticut Voices for Children are advocating for expansion of the right to counsel and eviction proceedings program. Like you just mentioned already, there's some funding proposed by the governor for that. And then 2 more. Fair Housing Center is working to ban foreclosures on unpaid sewer fees. And our friends at the ACLU are working on ending collateral consequences of criminal records in housing, prohibiting discrimination based on someone's criminal history. And I think at this point, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah. Hope I left you enough time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah White. I'm an attorney at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the campaign to expand just cause eviction protections to cover most tenants in Connecticut, and the bill that we just got, SB 143, which also has a public hearing on Tuesday, so a lot is going on. So the Just Cause campaign is led by a bunch of organizations, especially those that organize with tenants or have tenants as their members, along with other labor unions, racial justice organizations, and housing advocacy groups. And the steering of Just Cause includes the Fair Housing Center, as well as the Connecticut Tenants Union, Make the Road Connecticut, which also does tenant organizing, as well as working with immigrants, Connecticut DSA, and PT Partners. Next slide. So a little bit about Just Cause eviction protections. Just Cause protects tenants without a lease or who are month to month from being asked to move out or evicted for no reason. It doesn't mean that a tenant can't be evicted, but simply that a landlord has to have a permissible reason in order to ask them to move out or to start an eviction. And Connecticut actually has had a Just Cause law for more than 40 years, which we're just seeking to expand to cover more tenants, not even changing the framework. Connecticut's existing Just Cause law protects tenants who are 62 or older or disabled and live in complexes with 5 or more units. We think that's around 26% of renters, although it's less than that because the smaller complexes are excluded. Although at the same time, renters in public housing and in many subsidized housing complexes also have Just Cause protections. So it's already out there for a lot of folks. It's been there for decades. We know it works for those tenants. Expanding Just Cause means all renters can't be evicted or asked to move out without a justification listed in the law. And these include things like not paying rent, materially not complying with the lease, with rules or certain other landlord-tenant laws, not agreeing to a fair and equitable rent increase, as well as things that aren't really the tenant's fault, like if the landlord wants to move in or permanently take the unit off the market. So the landlord can still evict someone, but it has to be one of these reasons. And the bill we have for Just Cause that just came out, SB 143, would continue to exempt 1 to 4 unit complexes from Just Cause. So some of the reasons why it's important to expand Just Cause: Connecticut has some of the highest eviction rates in the country. 3 of our cities are in the top 40 highest for evictions, and we know that eviction is a racial justice issue, with Black and Latinx tenants respectively 3 times and 2 times more likely to face eviction than white tenants. No-fault evictions are not unusual. Currently, they make up almost 11% of eviction filings. The proportion of no-fault evictions has also grown over time. It's up 19% since 2018. And there was a year in the pandemic where it swelled to 35% of eviction filings. And the number of tenants who are affected by no-fault move-out notices is far larger. Most folks, when their lease isn't renewed, or if they're month to month, they're given that move-out notice, most folks are moving out before it reaches the eviction phase. And expanding Just Cause would prevent those unwanted moves as well. One of the reasons it's really important to expand just cause and no fault evictions is because they are so often a cover for retaliation or discrimination, which are very hard for tenants to prove when they've got an eviction and are trying to fight that. No fault evictions are also used to displace entire complexes of tenants, something we've seen increasingly during the pandemic. So just a few examples of how no fault evictions are used, in terms of retaliation. For example, in New Haven recently, with the tenants in the Blake Street Tenant Union, they were trying to negotiate with their landlord as a group to have a fair, graduated rent increase and other repairs. And more than a dozen tenants ended up getting, no fault eviction notices because they were month to month and didn't have a lease. Other examples, cover for discrimination. The Fair Housing Center over the years has had many complaints where folks have gotten no fault eviction notices, and there's circumstantial evidence that it may be, for a discriminatory reason, but because the landlord doesn't need to provide a reason in court to be able to evict someone under no fault, it just becomes incredibly hard to prove, it's discriminatory. And there have been times when we've been able to do that, but of course that takes, a ton of time from an attorney and is not always going to be the most straightforward case because there may not be, that kind of like smoking gun evidence that that's what's going on. And then, like I said, increasingly something we saw in the pandemic is mostly out-of-state corporate landlords coming in and giving entire complexes of tenants no fault notices in order to try to clear them up, slap some paint on the walls, do some sort of superficial renovations, and charge a lot more rent for a property. And often something we've seen, unfortunately, is rent it to like whiter tenants than the folks who were in there before. So we've seen this in New Haven, in Middletown, in Bloomfield, even in Woodstock, Connecticut, this same pattern of landlords giving everyone no fault notices to try to clear folks out, which of course displaces people who've been doing what they're supposed to, paying rent on time, following their lease. Sometimes folks have been there for decades and they can kind of lose their home overnight. So expanding just cause is important because it lets tenants put down roots, knowing that they can stay in their home, request repairs, and organize without fear of eviction or displacement. And just to reiterate again, we've had just cause in Connecticut for 40 years. We know it works for tenants who are covered without repercussions for landlords. We're not changing that framework. We're just, expanding the number of tenants it applies to. All right, next slide. So what we're organizing for is to expand our just cause law to all tenants with the exception of owner-occupied 1 to 4 families. A little bit more context, 5 other states in DC have universal just cause eviction protections. New Jersey has had it since the 70s, DC since the 80s, and more recently, New Hampshire, Oregon, California, and Washington. The Eviction Lab has done research that shows that just cause does reduce the eviction rate, and our estimate based on the number of no fault evictions in Connecticut is that it would bring down our eviction filings close to 11% and prevent many, many more of unwanted moves from lease non-renewals or move out notices, since most folks, when they get those, do try to move out. And as we talked about, landlords are protected and can still ask tenants to move out or evict for, the grounds that are listed in the law. We've also done some research to, look at how long it takes landlords to evict someone for cause, like not paying rent or lease violation or, no cause. And it's really about the same timeline. Some years it's actually a little quicker to evict people for grounds. So we don't think it will have an impact on the landlord's ability to evict tenants when there actually is a reason to do so. All right, next slide, sorry. So as I mentioned, on Wednesday night, we got the Just Cause Bill, which is SB 143, which has been introduced by the Housing Committee. So it maintains our existing Just Cause framework, which we've had for 40 years, but expands protections to all tenants in complexes with 5 or more units. So under SB 143, all of the landlords subject to expanded Just Cause are currently subject to Just Cause for elderly or disabled tenants and have been for 40 years. We are, however, advocating for it to expand to include 1 to 4 family complexes unless owner occupied. 2 reasons we think this is really important. One is a shift we've seen in the housing market, over the last several years, is corporate landlords buying up whole neighborhoods of usually 1 to 3 families and running them, like a mega complex, like with that same kind of business model. So we think it's important for folks, especially, with corporate landlords, to be protected even if they live in a 3-family home. The second reason we really want to include 1 to 4 family complexes is that so many of our immigrant tenants rent multifamilies and are especially vulnerable to abuse by landlords and need and deserve the same protections that everyone else has. So we found out yesterday that our public hearing for the Just Cause bill is going to be this Tuesday at 11 a.m. You can sign up for spoken testimony. You need to do so by Monday at 3 p.m. It can be on Zoom or in person. So the folks with the coalition are offering to help folks sign up, to text people when it's your turn to speak so you don't have to wait around on Zoom all day, and can also provide other support. We're offering rides, childcare, food, and Spanish interpretation. So I've put the link in if you want to sort of let us support you in testifying. We can also talk to people about like the kind of stories that might be good to tell, and can sign people up, but you can also sign up here on your own through the legislature. Just remember the deadline. It's so important that we have a lot of testimony, but very testimony about why expanding Just Cause is so important. I firmly believe that everyone has a housing story. I certainly have my own, which is what motivated me to become a housing attorney. And we all have a stake in housing security, whether you're a tenant or care about your neighbors. So we're looking for tenants to testify, of course, whether they've gotten a no-fault move-out notice or eviction or are worried about it, as well as, for example, teachers who can talk about the impact of no-fault evictions on their students, social workers, medical professionals, because of all of the health outcomes that we know flow from housing instability and eviction, and even homeowners and small landlords. So I've also linked in there a testimony guide and template, which you can use to sort of craft your written or spoken testimony that also has talking points as well. But fundamentally, I think it is the stories that are so important. And, we all have those for why housing stability and security matters. And we should all have these protections. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Sarah. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to really quickly just run through these last 2 slides before we jump into questions. But if you want to know who else is involved in housing advocacy, we've touched on a lot of the work that these partners are doing, but this is folks who fall under the umbrella of the Home Connecticut Collective Impact Initiative. It's a broad-based initiative of partners working to ensure everyone in Connecticut has access to safe, stable, accessible, and affordable housing in the community of their choice. They convene around several collective goals, including increasing rental assistance and investment in affordable housing, advancing housing quality, safety, and justice, and removing barriers to affordable housing production. So again, sort of all of those priority buckets that Sean mentioned earlier, this group also has a vested interest in advancing. The partnership's been serving as the backbone for this initiative since 2006. We have a coordinating committee who meets monthly and guide the work of that initiative, and an advisory group that we convene quarterly. So this is just a list of folks who are involved in that. Also, very quickly, there are some other great housing coalitions that are operating during this session. Again, most of these were mentioned throughout this presentation. I'll just do a quick shout out because I don't think that they were listed. The Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, one of their goals is leading to end child poverty. That's the focus of their campaign, and one of the elements of that is expanding just cause eviction protections to support family and housing stability. And they have several other child-focused tax credit and other initiatives that are worth looking into, and I'll commit to making sure that there's links to all of these resources in the slide deck that is shared alongside the recording, so folks can access all of the great work that they're involved in. Again, really, really quickly, here's just a couple different ways to engage. You've heard a ton about engaging in legislative action and participating in hearings and testimony. Stay tuned with our action alerts. I believe Chelsea, if she has already done so, has shared it in the chat for you to access those resources. There's tons of other ways to get involved. Ultimately, the most important thing is finding what avenue fits best for you. And the perspectives and expertise that you carry, there's different ways to engage in the conversation. So this is a resource that's available to you, but please make sure that your voice is a part of the conversation this year and moving forward. We certainly couldn't do this without everyone's voice at the table. So now I'm going to open it up for questions. I want to remind folks that you can drop it in the chat. So we'll be monitoring the chat. If folks have questions, we'll do our best to answer. But I want to leave the remainder of this time for you all to make sure that you have any questions answered that you want to make sure we touch on before we wrap up at 3.
Danielle, there's no way I did that good of a job, but it's a lot of information. So can you just mention again how folks can get, oh, there you go. I'll let you go.
Yeah, no problem. And I know it's a lot of information to digest, and it's also a Friday afternoon, and everybody's getting ready to testify at hearings. So I know folks are probably trying to dip and get some stuff done before the weekend. But ultimately, if you have questions and as you digest the information, you want to reach out, Sean is your guy. If you have any policy specific questions, if you need support in engaging in advocacy or submitting testimony or anything of that nature, if you want to participate in advocacy, coordinate, you can reach out to me. Both of our emails are listed here. And again, this will be included in the slide deck. But I think that really wraps us up for today. So thank you all. Oh, the last thing is that we're doing an intersectional webinar series. So I have to shamelessly plug that. Our next one is going to be March 6th. It's going to focus on the intersection of affordable and fair housing. But we've got conversations lined up for the first Wednesday of every month up through October, and then our affordable housing conference in November. So with all of that great information, I will leave you all to enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon, but appreciate you joining us here today. And thank you to Sarah, Sean, and Bill for also providing their expertise in this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you at the Capitol.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you, everyone.